Things are starting to heat up as we're going to run down the weekly current events of wrestling news in our next segment, the hot tags. And there's only one to talk about this week, but it's a really big one. Jim Ross, quote, retires, end quote, from WWE. And the story going all around here now, and of course, everything that happens with triplescoops.com, you have to take with a grain of salt until you actually hear it from the horse's mouth. And even then, you kind of can't take everything. Um, the story going around right now is that he did not retire, that he had said as soon as, or as recently as like last week or whatever, that he would never retire. And they essentially wanted to fire him for not controlling Ric Flair at the symposium. And instead of outright firing him and seeing a backlash for it, they told him, why don't you just kind of claim that you're retiring? If that's the case, that's really stupid. If anybody needs to be punished for that, it would need to be Ric Flair. But in the grand scheme of things, it didn't fucking matter. It was fun watching the symposium thing. And Ric Flair, as much of a jackass as he was during that, made that so much more entertaining. And so many more people watched that symposium to see Ric Flair acting like an asshole than if it would have just been a normal one. So if that's the case, they're just looking for a way to get rid of JR. They've proven it in the past that they're just not like too fond of the guy for some reason. I think this is really weird. It sucks. And hopefully he does another one of those random comes back at some random time kind of things. But what do you guys think? I'm gonna pass the buck around and I'm gonna start with Braden.
I really don't know what to believe. I certainly hope it's not over the 2K symposium ordeal. It seems really petty, doesn't it? Like that's like probably the worst reason to retire somebody is that they couldn't control a drunk panelist. I think that might be the first in the history of any corporate company. Because you think was Flair even like a hired talent, or was he just brought on for SummerSlam weekend? I don't even know if they were planning on hiring him or anything like that.
I believe he's had a Legends deal, so he wasn't an official talent, but he was affiliated with them as kind of a goodwill ambassador.
Okay,
Yeah,
so he got
it's
obviously got unambassadored after that.
no, it's
He
part of
just
the
got
whole
the
ambassador's contract. With him, I think he's going to have an argument with people, and then he's going to talk to Triple H, and they'll bring him back again. That's what always happens. He's got a good relationship, even though Flair acts up, and the WWE still will hire him back for whatever they need him for because it's Flair. He's synonymous with the company. He's got a good relationship with the McMahons, so they're putting the blame on the guy that nobody really cares for, and that's Jim Ross, which is kind of sad.
I mean, I just can't get over the fact that apparently, he's had all this heat or he's not really liked, but he's like the greatest or one of at least top three play-by-play announcers in wrestling history. I don't get where all the disdains ever come from him. Is it because they can't really find they never were able to find somebody better than him? I don't really understand. I really hope that it was on his terms and that maybe he was just saying he didn't want to retire just to kind of keep up. Like nobody would, that when he did, it'd be like a big shock or something like that. Like I really hope it is on his terms rather than him being, as what a company would being called, nicely forced out. Yeah, I really don't know what to believe at this point, but yeah, he was basically already semi-retired anyway.
yeah.
Come back.
He was only doing like things here and there, and I think he was like a part of NXT, wasn't he? Like a
He had
commentator
called
for it
a
or something.
while. Yeah, but for a while he was just calling one match or two a year for pay-per-view or whatever they'd have him, or like an old school Raw for a segment or sometime during WrestleMania season. So he had already been done his full-time gig for a while. But if this is the last we see of him, I wish him nothing but the best. And if he did get fired over the symposium thing, and that's really kind of terrible. We're going to say he retired, but he was forced out. I don't know what to believe, but good luck to JR and all his future endeavors, literally, in this case.
What do you think about it, Miguel?
Well, I'm going to be repeating myself from what I said during Keeping Kayfabe, but it's unfortunate that we lost JR. Wait, what the heck was that noise? I think that was my phone. But yeah, it's unfortunate that we lost JR because with that we lose a really big part of that old school wrestling mentality that I think was necessary. I mean, first from an announcing perspective, even though he wasn't doing much announcing compared to Michael Cole, I think he was still doing the. I believe at some point he was doing the backstage announcing stuff, where he coaches the guys through the earpieces, and you can compared to Michael Cole, you can tell that there's just something missing from the announcing. I mean, there's just a tinge of a knowledge of the actual in-ring ability, and just the JR-isms. I mean, just those little sound bites. I know that there's the whole joke about that he only talks in sound bites, but I mean, you think about all the moments that were punctuated by Jim Ross. I mean, the infamous Mick Foley cage drop. I mean, as great as the moment that is, it really goes. The JR comment goes hand in hand with that. So I think that's something that I think it's unfortunate that we're losing. Plus talent. I mean, I talked about it before. You look at the rush of talent that came in during JR's run as a head of talent relations, compared to all the talent and all the flops that came in during the John Laurinaitis era. The guy had an eye for talent. He knew what type of personality and what type of look would work. And having all that out of the business now for good, it's really unfortunate. And I don't know if the product's going to suffer, but it's really a shame. As far as the backstage stuff, as far as like the reasons behind it, I firmly believe it was because of the 2K incident. I mean, for years WWE has always made has always made JR the butt of their jokes, because Vince McMahon has this whole issue with Southern people. I mean, he's been trying to get rid of JR for years now, even though JR's been nothing but a model citizen into that company. And I think this was just their big opportunity. They're like, we got the fat guy. Let's nail him to the wall. And they just use this as an ability, and they call it retirement, because they don't want any bad blood from it, because they know if they say, hey, we fired Jim Ross, the whole internet, and even though it's still going to happen, but everybody in the business is going to just rebel against them, just because of how much respect JR has in there. I think JR's going to be fine. I've heard that I've heard from the guys here that JR's been kind of getting really antsy with WWE as of late, little by little. So maybe this was the best for him to kind of just take a breather, even though I know he loves doing what he does. Who knows? Just to silence the critics, I said that I would be surprised if he moved to anywhere else, specifically TNA. Although somebody made a good point, I could see him to maybe doing something with ROH if they wanted to. I mean, they're definitely much closer with WWE than TNA is with WWE. So who knows? Maybe that might be more of a transition for him. But we'll see. We'll see. It's just happening now. We'll see how JR goes from there.
Peyton?
Man, Miguel just hit on every single point I could have possibly touched on. I mean, only thing I could really say is I'll miss JR, and I hope we see him again. One thing I think that will be good out of this is JR has his voice out there. Talking on WWE wasn't the only place people got to see him. He has his Twitter. He has his blog on his website. And I think after the heat of this dies down, I think we're going to finally really get to see unfiltered JR thoughts and really get to see more of what goes on inside this guy's head and what he thinks about things that are going on now. So I'm definitely going to be interested to pay extra close attention to what's going to be going on those in the future.
He turns out to be like incredibly racist or something like that. He's like everybody keeps defending JR, and everybody's like, oh, he seems like such a nice guy. Turns out he's like a total bitter asshole.
It's like, I didn't hire Yoshitatsu. I don't like
Right.
Chinese.
Yeah, he starts making comments like the Sakamoto thing that Tensai did, and
Yeah,
Why do you think
ne-
he's best friends with Zeb?
now that I don't have to be under this Be a Star campaign, let me tell you about all these people I hate in WWE, and starts saying everybody who isn't white or something like that. That'd be horrible.
Let me
Kofi
tell you about
Kingston?
that. Let me tell you about that N-word, Biggie Langston.
Right, yeah, that would be just like, what the fuck, JR? Like, turns out that they're actually doing like the WWE a service by getting rid of this guy who was like this massive bigot or something.
Zeb Coulter was molded over like
Yeah.
JR.
What do you think, Drew? Any other thoughts nobody's touched upon yet?
Well, everyone's mainly touched upon the main things. The only thing I'm going to add really is to comment Miguel made that that the commentating booth they have now, which it doesn't have that same chemistry that JR and Jerry Lawler has. I believe that's mainly Lawler's fault because he provides nothing to commentating now besides for comments. To me, it's just JBL and Cole running the show now. I think Jerry's just there just for show now, and that's the only thing I don't like about it. But yeah, I will miss JR. Everyone will. JR is probably the best in the business, and whoever ever will be. So, you will be missed, JR.
Jerry's there so they can keep an eye on him and make sure he doesn't have another heart attack.
Oh yeah.
So like it worked the last time. Just stay here. Burhan, any other thoughts?
Yeah, the fact is, I'll relay the same message that I relayed on Keeping Kayfabe, which was the fact here that I believe that JR was always in an abusive relationship with the WWE. And the one thing that kept him there was the fact that he was so loyal to the company. In terms of his status now, I think it's a good thing. I don't want to see him return. I don't want him going back because I really feel that, like any abusive relationship, he's just fed up. And I don't blame him. In terms of anybody, I could say JR deserves to be away from the company. And I hope if he wants to stay in wrestling, he has two options, TNA or Ring of Honor. TNA is flushing itself down the toilet, and I've got a funny feeling that Dixie's going to try and catch JR's attention again because apparently she likes quick fixes. But in terms of any company, I would say Ring of Honor would probably be the best choice for him in terms of his booking style, in terms of finding new talent, and also that it can be used to help groom new talent for the WWE, like future stars. So he's working indirectly with the company without listening to Vince give him shit. Um, but as a whole, I believe wholeheartedly that press conference was the reason, and he's getting the stick for it. And in terms of the way the company has treated him, I just think they really should be ashamed of themselves. Be a star, my fucking ass, as far as I'm concerned. And as far as Triple H and co are concerned, they really need to look in the mirror because it's ridiculous. And JR, you're on to bigger and better things, my friend. And I really wish the best for you. And you know what? I do really hope that he does become the unfiltered JR because he has been on his blog. Me and Payton alluded to this on the other show. Was the fact that he was basically being really snippy to people. Anyone asked him the same old question, he would get really sort of a short fuse with them. So, in a sense, I'm happy about this, and hopefully it will mean a more calmer, easier schedule for him and a better lifestyle for JR. So, he's going to surely be missed, and he's the guy that I've been there since day one, since he first debuted in the WWE, and I've seen the shit he's gone through. So, JR, it's well deserved, and good luck.
I blame Triple
I'm
H
really
and his new regime.
I'm really actually hoping for the opposite. I really want to see racist JR now. Just it's funny. I want I want to see that now.
Yeah, it's just like there was too many M words in the WWE.
TNA will watch this and they'll sign JR. Typical kind of thing because WWE, whenever they release somebody, everybody always goes, "Oh my God, they're going to go to TNA." They'll sign JR. They'll give him a racist gimmick, and he'll be the next world champion.
No, they'll sign the Oklahoman because it's as close to JR.
Yeah.
I don't remember about
JR.
when Abraham Washington left. Did people think he was going to go to TNA?
He might have been
I
like one
don't
of the only
think so.
people that they didn't actually say that for.
How much of an ego blow is that for him? When he's like, I'm just gonna sit here and wait for the TNA call, and it never comes. That's gotta really bruise your ego when even TNA won't give you a look.
That
Can I,
meme where the guy's sitting there and he's like, "I'm just gonna sit here and wait for something," and then the next frame is just his skeleton. That's what it is.
Can I add something to the hot tags quickly?
Sure, why not?
Okay, apparently, and I've just was checking out scoopscoopscoops.com on this. Lawler apparently says that Ziggler, a spot that he did on the tag team match that he had against Ziggler and CM Punk when he was teaming with Randy Orton, was partially the reason why he had a heart attack. And it was during the match, there was a spot where Ziggler landed 10 straight elbows on Lawler's chest. And Lawler said in the interview that he hit them with all his body weight. And he added, honestly, and I talked to my cardiologist about it, and he said, absolutely, the trauma to my chest from those elbows could have been hard enough to knock your heart out of rhythm. It would start slowly and then get more and more and more out of rhythm until it just seized up. Thoughts on this?
I really hope this doesn't lead to Ziggler being pushed further down the card. honestly, any further, and you might as well just he'll be in the Ted DiBiase position.
New
You know,
finisher.
yeah, he'll basically be done. I mean, maybe that's the case. I'm not a doctor. Whatever the doctor says, I'd probably take that more to heart. But I mean, it's wrestling. It is what it is. I mean, it's not ballet, and for a guy like Lawler in his 60s to be complaining like that, a guy like him shouldn't even have been in the ring. So I don't blame him. I blame WWE more for putting him in that position. But I really hope this doesn't affect Ziggler. This revelation doesn't or hasn't. I hope that's not the reason why he's been depushed so drastically. Like I said, it's unfortunate. Maybe that was the case, but as I said, it's wrestling. You kind of, if you're not tough enough to handle it, you shouldn't be in the ring.
Very much so. And the one other thing I want to add to this as well, because as you said, it's basically Lawler kind of bitching about this. In terms of Ziggler, apparently the whole reason that he's being depushed at the moment is because he's been very outspoken and loud and too cocky. So the WWE's kind of cutting the legs off from under him for a while. So because you find now in a lot of his interviews, he's been more humble. He hasn't been outlandishly saying how John Cena is boring or other little issues that he has with talent because it's not getting him over with the company brass.
You know what? Let me kind of dovetail off of that, because that's one of the things that bugged me about Jim Ross, is that he kind of fell into that same spot that a lot of the elders get into in terms of talking about talent. And he was the big one that used to say this about how talent needs to stop complaining and grab the brass ring and talk about how they need to put an effort into them. And you listen to a lot of the much older talents and you talk to them, especially I just read excerpts from Chris Jericho's biography. I think it was the second one, the one after Lion's Tale. And I just heard a review about Hardcore Holly's Bob Corholly's recent book, and they both verify that's very much not the case in WWE. If you so much as try to go out of your way or speak out or do anything like that, you're gonna get the hammer dropped onto you fast. And that's one thing that JR used to do, and I really hope he stops doing that, because that was clearly a WWE mandate thing that they had to do that. But I just needed to vent about that. And yes, you can end the segment now, Tony.
Yeah, does anybody else have any other thoughts that we haven't already covered?
Stone Cold.
That was like the gayest Stone Cold chant I've ever heard.
One really quick thing, and I don't want to go into a conversation about it, but I just want to say that it's a victory for the world of wrestling. Wrestling is back involved with the Olympics. They won the vote this weekend. They beat out baseball and squash as if there was ever any doubt. But yeah, wrestling is back in the Olympics. Just to follow up on that story, good for it.
Shrug.
All right, guys, we're going to roll along here and take a little bit of a break in the rest hold. And when we come back after that, you'll be getting the answers to your monthly mailbag questions.